the rhythm, catching every beat. Together we embrace the futures at our feet. The futures at our feet.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Edufuturists podcast. We are joined by a repeat guest today, one that we have, I suppose, the circles of life without getting into the Elton John song. It comes in peaks and troughs, and I know that there's lots of different things, but we couldn't.
Elton John song, mate. I don't. I feel like we need to start there. Like
No,
we
we
started a
don't.
podcast and we're doing the professional.
No, we don't.
But you just started singing Lion King songs.
Absolutely, you know, life is
Gary Barlow
good
singing,
start
No.
Gary Barlow singing Lion King songs.
Yeah, I'm going on my own again, everybody. Do you know, tape that is dwindled, and yeah, I'm going to be doing just Disney songs. So Moana, Lion King is going to be the next album that you'll hear from me, or the next karaoke that we have down at the Boom Battle Bar. Ben, you never know. But yeah, I think as we go round, Jamie, I know that we've had you on to discuss different books that you've written. We've been friends for such a long period of time. I know you've been a champion and a supporter through C-Learning and just in general with the Uprising. Just a reminder, everybody, by the time this goes out, we've probably sold out. Me and Ben are in a really awkward situation now where we're having to say, get your tickets, even to partners, otherwise you'll be giving the award away virtually. But if there are tickets still available, head over to Edufuturists/Uprising. I think that's right, Ben. Won't do all the WWs because I get about 15 in there. But let's get going in regards to the new book, Jamie. Let's do an intro for those people that might not have listened before in regards to who you are, the role that you play, and the different hats that you do. But also then this book, the title of it, and why did you think this book was so relevant in the world of quite a few books that are coming out recently around AI? So let's start there.
Yeah, cheers and thanks, guys. And it's great to see you as always. And as we were just chatting about before we started, you do great work and contribute so much to the sector of education and technology and how it intersects together. And so, respect to you for all the work that you do. So, for anyone listening to this who maybe I haven't met yet, I'm Jamie. Got a long background in education and technology. Worked in universities, colleges and schools for decades. Still do, so I'm still a director of a large multi-academy trust today. But my main passion really is all about people and helping people, basically. Helping people to do things that they didn't necessarily think they could do. And sometimes that involves technology, and sometimes it involves changing cultures and how people work together. And that's my real passion, really. I often say to people I don't feel like I've ever had a job. In fact, we were just talking about that earlier, about if you do things that you're passionate about and that you love, it doesn't ever feel like work, does it? Because everyone on this call, I know, works very long hours, but it doesn't ever feel like work in a normal sense. It just feels like who we are and what we're about. So I have a real privilege. I'm chairman of C-Learning, which is a leading technology specialist. So we've got expertise around cloud and AI and cultural transformation and things like that. And we work with people all over the world. So I have that real privilege of doing that, which again is just an absolute joy. And we live in really interesting changing times, don't we? Which we're probably going to dig into during this. And I suppose one aspect of that is AI. And so to your point, Stephen, about, why the book, I didn't, the real driver behind it was more some of the emerging themes and issues that I see happening potentially. And I'm not 100. And whilst none of us can predict the future, of course. I mean, I make a comment about that in the book. That anybody who thinks they can should probably set a few red flags going, really. But if you've been doing this as long as I have, there's just a few things that I see happening that I think we should think about now before we have the unintended consequences, basically. So the book's called The Responsible AI Revolution, Shaping a Smarter Future. And it does end optimistically, but a lot of the book also deals with some very difficult topics that I think we need to frankly talk about. I'm a big believer in avoiding unintended consequences if we can. And I spend a lot of time thinking about that. And at the moment, I think maybe a lot of our focus isn't on quite the right thing. And I'll give you an example. If you've been around as long as I have, you'll remember the internet taking off and arriving in a big way. So back in the 90s, I know the internet was around a lot before that, but if you go back to the 90s when the internet started to become adopted in a big way, I remember being in countless meetings at the start of my career with senior executives, all of whom were saying the same thing, which was something like, we must have a website because of the internet. And I remember listening to people, and I was that awkward kid who was asking the questions why all the time. So I'd sit there and I'd go, okay, I get it. I know what a website is and why we should probably have one, but why? What do you actually want to do with it? What's the purpose? And I was asking a deeper question, a more meaningful question, but nobody wanted to talk about that. It was a bit like that episode. I don't know if you've ever seen it. This is a great intellectual reference I'm going to give here. There's an episode of The Simpsons where Homer sets up a website and then just sits there expecting the money to roll in because he's got a website. and of course what the producers were getting at was exactly what I'm talking about. Back in the 90s, I was in countless meetings where people were saying, well, no, we need a website for our business. And I think we're repeating the same mistakes now, because just think back with hindsight. HMV didn't need a website. HMV needed to reinvent its business model and become Spotify. Toys R Us didn't need a website. It needed to become Amazon. Blockbuster didn't need a website for Blockbuster. It needed to become Netflix. So the real questions weren't asked. And right now, my contention is it's all happening kind of in a different way, but all over again with AI. Because everywhere I go, I don't know about you guys, but everywhere I go at the moment, people are asking questions like, oh, this AI tool, yeah, we should bolt that onto what we're doing. It'll make us more efficient, or we'll save time, or it'll do these things for us. That's not the question. The real big question is, what does AI actually mean fundamentally for how we live, work, and learn? Because my contention is that 10, 15 years from now, if we don't think about those consequences fundamentally in terms of our actual core business model or operating model, or whatever you want to call it, I actually think we're going to have the digital equivalent of the high street again. And it'll be because people thought AI was a bolt-on instead of actually a fundamentally much more disruptive and important thing. So that's a sort of hopefully some way of answering your question, Stephen, about why I thought it might be important.
It goes back and it makes me think about a couple of points of, are we only trying to shoehorn, and I think it might have been Anthony Selwyn actually, at an event I went to. So firstly, reminds me of the Bob Harrison thing, and the Henry Ford quote of, if you ask people what they wanted, they probably just want the faster horses. They didn't see the car coming, or didn't even want the car because they didn't know how it would transform their lives. And I'm not saying AI is the car, but I am in some way, because ultimately, often people go, how can I use this to just be faster with some of the things that I'm already doing? So lesson planning. Have we unpicked why we're doing lesson plans? Those transactional things in education that actually take quite a lot of time, if we focus just on education to begin with, are really relevant. And also then, have we really discussed the pick and mix education that me and Ben have been talking about and will become prevalent in our trends book for this year? Also, we had Tara Jones coming on and talking about actually a healthy, balanced diet in regards to education. That often, and I don't know if anybody's seen, but in Spain, the Madrid local government are introducing a restriction on screen time. Don't know if anybody's seen that, but they are going to limit primary education to 1 hour of screen time per week. Okay, right. But what about outside of education and when they get home and all the screen time? And we discussed that with Disrupted, didn't we, in terms of Joe Philippa? And so it's linking it all together. But also, what about the fact that we've not really discussed that these people are in a classroom confined, apart from lunches, breaks, and everything else? We've reduced physical activity and outside space elements. All these things come together from conversations we've had, and just go, AI needs to be seen of how education should be, not a replacement of some of the transactional things of what we're currently doing. Because let's be honest, go back to Sagar Mitra, the education system as it currently is isn't really what we want to be doing anyway. So why are we trying to shoehorn a wonderful technology that is so transformative into something that, and the stuff that we didn't want to do and shouldn't be doing anyway? And I don't know if you want to talk that, Jamie.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I think we're all on the same page with this one, I think, at least on this call, in the sense that education has needed something of a revolutionary transformation for quite some time to be fit for purpose in the digital age that we're in. I mean, if I put my employer hat on for a second, because I've got a number of hats, as you mentioned earlier, and if I look at it from an employer perspective, we want people with certain characteristics and skills and behaviours which don't really easily align to what we would regard as the national curriculum right now. I've been involved in a few conversations around the national curriculum review that's taking place, and some bits of it give me room for cause for encouragement and optimism, but I would like to see something far, far more radical, far more revolutionary when it comes to what we actually need in the world that we're in. All of you guys know on this call that in your business lives, sort of in terms of what you do outside of this, you need a diverse set of skills that are aligned to the digital age that we're in. And I fail to see how a model that was built in the industrial age, sort of, and still pretty much is, really aligns to that. I mean, as much as we can, and I can in my own little world that I move in, like back when I was chair of primary school, I did what I could do at that point to encourage the team to be bold and innovative and creative, to think and work differently in a way that was more aligned to the world we're in. So, such as project-based learning approaches to, curriculum methodology and things like that. Because those are the kind of skills people are going to need. And AI skills, of course, absolutely fundamental now. Now, I know I should put a caveat on this as well, because I was very mindful of this when I was writing the book, that we talk about AI as though it's a defined thing. And of course, it's a bit like saying health. It's like, well, what do you mean by health? Do you mean, biology? Do you mean mental health? Do you mean the science of it, the economics, the cost, the NHS? There's 1,000 things. So AI is one of these catch-all terms, isn't it? That covers such a broad range of things. And it has so many subsets and criteria. But for convenience, we'll just refer to it as AI. But whatever we determine AI to mean as a catch-all term, then we should have it as a core part of our thinking now, a core part of the curriculum, a core part of how we operate, because I believe, a bit like, I saw an interview with David Bowie, of all people, talking a long time ago when he was talking about how transformational the internet was going to be, and his contention was basically, we haven't got a clue what's coming. This is going to be much, much bigger than what you think. It isn't just a website. And I think it's the same with AI. I think we can't anticipate a lot of the ways it's going to change, but I think we need to have a radically different approach, and we need to have step change in our thinking. Organic, this is not about organic little change. I think we need a much more radical kind of review, really, to be honest.
I'm definitely with you, Jamie, and I think we've been one of the things that we talked about multiple times, and this was obviously when Dan was on the podcast as well. We talked about this idea around, we're led to believe that education will evolve to meet the needs of learners in the world, but it isn't, and we want evolution. And I know that there's a big argument, and when you put out something using the word revolution in education, you'll get piled on, whether you have done yet or not. We know you use the word revolution, everybody's like, you can't do this, revolution's disruptive, it's almost always violent, think about the collateral damage and all the stuff that goes with it, because actually change is one of those things that most people want to do slowly. It's that thing of everybody wants change, but nobody wants to change. And the fact is that a revolution, although it'll be painful, although it will be disruptive, right now, as we hear people saying, and Bob Harrison again mentions this, that the genie's out of the bottle. It's not like we can go and put like generative AI back in. ChatGPT can't, let's forget about it and put our heads in the sand. We're not in that space now. And interestingly, the revolution is happening. It's about the question of whether, and people can come at us on that. The revolution is happening. The fastest disruption I've ever seen. 100 million users in 100 days of ChatGPT. 125 million website visits on ChatGPT a day currently. They're not. Like Sam Altman literally put out something out the other day. Please stop doing image generation. We can't keep up with demand. It's absolutely revolutionary. It's not like any other technologies we've said in multiple times before. So obviously, revolution and evolution is that challenge that is in there. But one of the things that I'm really interested in digging into with you, because obviously you use that word, and you've used that word ethical, and responsible, and I really very much like that as a former RE teacher, as you well know, the responsibility and about making ethical decisions around some stuff. I'd really love to dig into what you're seeing as, or what you're thinking are these ethical challenges that perhaps we haven't considered, that we we might have just overlooked and not realised the importance of. Can we go to that?
Yeah, 100%. That's the core DNA of the book, I suppose, and something I'm very, very passionate about. Partly because I suppose if you've been doing what I've been doing as long as I have, you increasingly become aware of the unintended consequences of things, I suppose. I suppose part of it's about that. And I think right now we've got the opportunity to do something about it. And as I see it, and we're getting into some, I don't know if it's controversial or not, but how I see the world playing out right now, and it won't be lost on many of the people viewing this that they'll have seen on the news sort of the approach that, say, for example, the United States is taking. And I use the United States in this example because they are the source of so many of the platforms that we may be talking about, because a lot of the tech platforms we're using have come from the United States in terms of ownership and their creation, etc. The United States, recently, the vice president, quite spectacularly, in my opinion, said on record, and I'll try and get the exact words right, but he said something like, "We won't allow safety to compromise innovation when it comes to AI." And he may have said, he may have used a different word to compromise, but that's basically word for word, more or less, what he said. And I remember watching this in disbelief, thinking, did he really just say that? And I straight away, my mind went to this vision of sitting on top of like a huge Saturn V rocket. And I'm in the cockpit at the top above tens of thousands of gallons of rocket fuel. And then my fellow astronaut leans in and tells me, about the fact that, well, at least when we were building this, we didn't allow safety to compromise innovation. And then they light the fuse. And I'm thinking, would I want to be sitting on top of that rocket at that time? And I feel like that's where we are. Now, where I think this is going, and it's just a purely subjective opinion, but I think the world's going to kind of go down two different roads here. I think we're going to have one approach, which is innovation at any cost, right? And we can have a debate about what that might mean, but I've got some pretty scary views on that one. Or I think the world's going to go down the road of, well, let's do this a little bit more responsibly. We'll still make mistakes because it's going so fast, as you said, Ben. You're absolutely right. I've never seen anything as disruptive as this in my entire career. And I think it's just at the beginning, which is why it's even more important that we just pause and go into it wisely, maybe with frameworks, regulations, and ideas that will hopefully limit some of the unintended consequences. But ultimately, my optimistic end to the book is that I believe ultimately it's the responsible AI that will prosper, ultimately. And I think that's the case because throughout all of human history, when we do things that are a little bit stupid, we learn the hard lesson and then we get a bit smarter, don't we? Throughout all of human history. It's one of the things that drives evolution and progress. And I think we might see that now with AI. I think we might see some people do some great innovation at any cost, and then I think the world might get a little bit smarter. So ultimately, I think if we had a postcard from the future, 15, 20 years from now, and they were talking about this and saying, hey, this is how AI worked out in 2042, I think it's going to be our postcard from the future would probably be talking about responsible AI and how we got a little bit smarter after it caused a whole bunch of problems. And to do that, we're going to need a whole bunch of different thinking, and I'd like it to be a democratic, transparent process. I would love to see ethical frameworks around how we do this, and I've made a few suggestions and proposals about that in my book and come up with just a few ideas of how I think it could be done, but of course it'll be a much bigger debate. And even if we only get halfway towards some of those ideas, then I think our responsible AI is going to be the most transformational thing that we've ever seen in our lifetimes anyway, when it comes to technology and how we live, work, and learn. And so I think there's huge possibilities there. Just one thing I will mention as well, just because I think it's such an important thing that I see, because you mentioned about how disruptive the world is right now, Ben, and I totally echo that. I've never seen anything like the disruption AI and the potential it's bringing before. A mutual friend of all of ours on this, and someone who we all dearly miss, David Price, a very, very close friend who we sadly lost last year. I used to talk often with David about what he called disintermediation, which he talked about in his first book, Open, which is an incredible book, of course. And even though back then we didn't know about the AI we're talking about today, David used to be talking about this, and he was quite convinced that the future was going to have this process of disintermediation where we effectively cut out the middle person in a process because technology will enable us just to do so much more. And even though we didn't know about generative AI tools and AI in its broader sense back then, isn't it funny now to reflect back on that and think, wow, that's like exactly what AI is doing. And one of the most disruptive ways it's going to change all of our worlds is disintermediation. The fact that we can now be empowered to do so much. I mean, some of you guys already know, but I love the image creation AI tools, so I mean, I'm no artist, but I have a very creative mind and I love playing with the art of the possible with those tools to create amazing images and things. And I can now do stuff that almost looks like a professional artist that created it, but it's just me with absolutely zero skills normally in that area. And I love it, and I'm sure that composers might feel the same way. You can now create music in new ways and do all these things. And this is an example, again, of the immense disruption that's happening. But on the optimistic side, I do think responsible AI will be ultimately 10, 15 years. I might not live to see it, but if I do, I think that's ultimately where we will end up.
Yeah. And it's really interesting because responsible AI, I think, is what you've just summarised. I think it's thinking about, as we build the rocket ship, ensuring that we listen to the people that might just be influential in regards to making sure we're using the right bolts. Some bolts, the right fuel, making sure that the safety of the passengers and everything else is considered. But what that doesn't mean is we never allow the rocket ship to take off, and we go back to having no rocket ships and going back to we don't want that exploration anymore.
Exactly.
Let's use sails and boats and everything else. And I think there's a very distinguishable difference between that. But often people always go, and be responsible. But responsible doesn't mean that you completely lock it down and never allow it to happen. What it means is that you consider, you reflect, you go through like an alpha and a beta testing process to make sure that it goes through, not just it's switched off by default. And I think that's just a right to call out, because if you look at the work from people like Rose Looking, it's not to say that AI shouldn't happen and shouldn't be utilised. It's a case of how can we use it better, but also ensuring that we have those considerations in regards to what could be the consequences, the unintended consequences, as you mentioned as well. So yeah, and we'll see that obviously working as a tech provider into education.
Yeah,
where
I mean,
people you speak to them and they go, "No, we don't have that. Well, that's turned off." And you go, "Well, why? Oh no, it's not safe."
yeah,
Have you
I
even
mean,
looked at whether it's safe, or have you just turned it off?
yeah, absolutely. To your point, Stephen, there. I mean, it's like that phrase, you can't uninvent the internet, can you? You know, and the genie is definitely out of the bottle. And I think I like that old Tolkien quote, you know, the Lord of the Rings writer, when he said, "You can fence yourself in, but you can't fence the world out." And that's absolutely true. And I think that's what goes on in a lot of education, as you know very well. There's a lot of people might like to fence themselves in, but you know, you can't fence the world out. AI is there and it's massive. On the unintended consequences.
Can I just jump in really
Yeah,
quickly
go for
there? Before you go to unintended consequences,
yeah.
I went to see a band this weekend and called Kid Capiche. They're a bit controversial, a bit punky, and one of their lines they talk about in one of their songs when they were talking about Brexit. They said this phrase: "You didn't lock them out, you just locked us in." And I thought that very much ties in, doesn't it?
Yeah, 100%. You know,
bit controversial, I know.
No, it's a good point, and I echo it. And I'd like to give you a tangible example of unintended consequences, because so it gets real for people to think about. If you think about certain groups of people who might be unintentionally impacted by AI, and I'll give you an example. I was talking at something recently where we were looking at the job sectors and job roles by certain specific types of groups of people. And for example, most administration roles are still primarily, generally done by females. Okay, in workplaces, if you took a typical local authority or a typical, I don't know, organisation, what you might call the administration jobs, as it's defined as a job category, is still dominated by a certain gender, in this case, female. That same job role is generally predicted to be one of those most likely to be disrupted by AI and automated by AI, because AI lends itself very nicely to well-defined, automated sort of tasks and processes. So my contention is, might an unintended consequence be that we accidentally put a lot of females out of work? Now, this is a controversial question, but it's a foreseeable risk, isn't it? Now, I met a chief executive of a charity recently, a wonderful lady who had already thought about this and done something about it. So in her particular case, she had taken her administration team as the first team to be upskilled and trained on AI. And they became the engine of innovation inside her organization. So instead of them losing their jobs, they actually became sort of into what you might call a new job, I suppose, which is almost like an in-house training team on innovation and efficiency and driving forward these things. Because her contention was that if I hadn't done that, she was worried about it and how it might affect certain groups in society. And so that's an example of unintended consequences, where I'm not suggesting for a second that any engineer in Silicon Valley sat down and thought, how do I put women out of jobs? That isn't what happened. They just rushed headlong into how brilliant can we be with this algorithm. And that's all they thought about. They didn't think about the unintended consequences, which goes back to how we started the conversation in some ways about what was the driver for the book. Well, it's going to spend a lot of time thinking about that sort of thing. And I'm keen to create a smarter and more sustainable and equitable world. So how might we do it? And none of us are going to get it all right. We're all going to make new mistakes in new ways, but that's part of innovation, isn't it? But I think that people need to feel safe to innovate and safe to try these things in a culture of trust, supported in certain ways as well. So they can make new mistakes, but in an informed way where some of the unintended consequences have already been thought about and we avoid making some stupid mistakes, basically.
And do you think that another thing within the book is around that technical proficiency and that upskilling, that training? Do you think that actually that links into the reduction, the reinvention, and the redefining of roles? Does that allow that people can, because they have a better skill set, have the ability to then think about what their future is beyond just the current role and the transactional work that they're doing? I know that this was quite early into the stages of generative AI. I think it might have been 2023, but maybe it was a little bit later, that IKEA potentially could have laid off, I think it was about 3,000 of its staff as they replaced the website and put an AI chatbot in there. But what they didn't is they actually gave more technical training and understanding for that, but also then put them into different roles, upskill them, and ended up being paid more. There's a conversation in regards to what organizations do and how they support people rather than seeing AI as a replacement for humans, but also how they now, and it links into leadership as well, how they made those step change in terms of investing in staff development, upskilling, and knowledge base so that they can be better with AI and all technology, so that as job roles evolve or are replaced, those staff are there to do it.
Yeah, 100%. So my thoughts on what you were saying there, Stephen, is I'm mindful of that quote from that song, "Reasons to be cheerful." 1, 2, 3. There are reasons to be cheerful around this, I think. I think as long as we do it responsibly and wisely and intelligently and cautiously and in the right way, thinking about unintended consequences again, I think we should see AI as a colleague, not as our boss. If it's ever our boss and not a colleague, we're in real trouble. It's that old thinking of, technology makes a great slave but a terrible master. And oh boy, does that apply when it comes to AI. So how do we do that? Well, I think we need cultures and leadership that encourage training and support training and upskilling and support for how we might use these tools. But I think it needs to be done in an intelligent way. And what I mean by that is that if you give a new tool to most people, what they unintentionally do, but will nearly always do, is their first thought will be, how do I use this new tool to do what I do now, but do it a bit better? And it goes back to my earlier point about the high street. The high street wasn't killed by the internet. The high street was killed by not understanding what the internet really meant. And a lot of businesses and organizations and jobs may end up getting destroyed by not actually asking, what does AI really mean for us? So I would encourage leaders to think about not just how you can use these wonderful AI tools for your existing team to be more efficient or to do more. Yes, they are going to do that because that's inevitable. These tools do enable us to be super powered. I mean, I would say that just as a generalization, the average person can probably be about 10 times more productive with these AI tools. And I base that on the fact that I've actually got people I know and who work with me who can do the job of what in a previous organization, in a previous life, I would have needed maybe 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 people to do, and now one person can do it with AI. So you're looking at a 10x factor on an individual if they've got AI, which is incredible, isn't it? But the real question we need to apply to that is, okay, you can 10x your person, but actually let's ask the bigger question of what should you be doing at all? Right? What does it actually mean for our business? And this takes people into uncomfortable territory because we all want to feel safe and have a predictable world around us. And if somebody is saying, your business won't even exist in 18 months' time unless you fundamentally reinvent, what you're doing, that's kind of the bigger question we need to get comfortable with. I sometimes refer to it as hugging the cactus. We have to be comfortable with discomfort, and we have to be comfortable with hugging that cactus, even if it's painful, so that we can actually think about, well, okay, What does this actually mean for what we're doing? Now, if we get that right in a strategic workforce development sense, and we develop people to be safe and feel safe to innovate with these tools, I think we'll get fundamental innovation. Because, of course, remember, innovation is not about doing what you do now, but faster. That's operational effectiveness, and you should just be doing that anyway, frankly. Innovation is about doing new things in new ways. And so if we do that's what AI is really offering. The prize is staring us right in the face. And I can't help it. I'm an optimist. I see a future where we use that to create the biggest change for humanity that we've ever seen, where people can live more equitable, prosperous lives, happier, healthier lives, and having a life that has purpose and meaning in a way that they couldn't before. Because it could be one of the most equitable sort of things we've ever seen in terms of increasing equity of opportunity for people, I believe. If we get it right. And I hope we do.
Yeah, and I'm hopeful that we do as well. I think I talk a lot and I use the phrase positive disruption. And actually, and I'm not saying that I came up with that idea, but I talked about positive disruption and I've been saying that actually AI brings that positive and purposeful disruption, which is I know what you're hopeful for there as well. And interestingly, if it comes to that conversation about equity, some of this is, you used the phrase earlier, which I'm jumping on, or Steve jumped on it earlier, about unintended consequences. And a lot of the time we can't know and predict, as you said earlier, but we can do some I really like that pre-mortem mentality, that we can think about what the end looks like and what we would do to ensure that that doesn't happen, or potential ends, and be thinking in that space, which is obviously a big part of that innovation thing, of the getting a minimal viable product out, getting that into people's hands, and then people going, okay, what works, what doesn't work. But it's also thinking down the line of what could this look like, and what would be the implications of this if this went wrong or if this went right. Part of that is something another thing that I know you're passionate about, which is about leadership. And some of the issues around equity, some of the issues about ensuring that we aren't left behind, and ensuring that we don't just do efficiencies and we move into like genuine innovation, will be tied into leadership. And interestingly, what from this revolution space and thinking about what this is going to look like in a smart and ethical and responsible way, what do you think leadership's going to need to look like for people in this new space? Because it's going to be it's fast paced, and leaders obviously like bureaucracy is based around layers and understanding and approval levels and all the things that go with it. What's leadership going to have to look like? I don't want to lead you down a journey, but you probably get where I'm going.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and I know the issues that you're getting at there as well. And yeah, 100%, because there's going to be a need for some radical transformation there as well. I mean, a number of people have talked about this in terms of the kind of businesses that are going to prosper on the road ahead in the digital age that we're in. And it's not going to be about the biggest or the fastest necessarily. It'll be about the most agile. And I think leaders are going to need to be agile in a way that they maybe never have previously considered. I recently got all of the Sea Learning team together at an away day. And one of the slides I had on the screen was a ship that was sinking because the anchor was too heavy. And one person's arguing to keep the anchor because it cost a fortune and they've put so much effort into the anchor, and the other person's saying, throw the anchor overboard because we're going to sink. And I referred to it in economic terms to what consultants often call the sunk cost fallacy, which is this economic term about, if you put so much into something or you're too emotionally close to it, it can sink you, quite literally. And I think leaders are going to have to adapt to this, because it is our natural instinct to keep doing what we're familiar with, and what we've invested in especially. And of course, the pandemic brought lots of these issues out, didn't it? I mean, one of the funniest takeaways from the pandemic for me was that I quite literally know personally leaders who had to be faced with either threat of arrest or death, so arrest or death, to try an online meeting. And after they'd moved to online meetings, we were having a conversation. They went, I don't know why I didn't do this before. It's actually a much smarter way of working, isn't it? And I was thinking to myself, isn't that fascinating about human behavior and about change and how we work? There's some really interesting issues in this. So we shouldn't underestimate how difficult change is from a human behaviour point of view. But to your point about leadership, Ben, I think that this speaks directly to it in the sense of our leaders are going to have to be the kind of people with the kind of characteristics and behaviours where they are comfortable with that kind of transformation, that kind of agility. So maybe this is a recruitment, selection, headhunting kind of question for senior executives around how we tease out people who have those kind of characteristics and skills and behaviours, because they're going to have to set the culture and the tone of organisations, which, if they're going to prosper on the road ahead, it's painfully obvious to some of us that we are looking at a very different kind of organisational culture and a very different kind of characteristic and behaviour and skill set attached to all of that. And the good news, again, being an optimist, is that we can do it. I mean, just look again at the pandemic, what happened. I spent a lot of time reflecting on that period of time, which was quite surreal, wasn't it? And I'm always mindful of the fact that as we reflect on things, there's always a danger we can reinvent what actually happened. So I'm very conscious of that. But if you look back at the pandemic, it was quite remarkable what could be achieved in a short period of time if we have no choice, if we're forced to do it. And I'm not suggesting we should be forced to adopt AI or forced to go down a certain road, but I do think we need that sense of urgency, and I think we need to do it wisely and responsibly. And I think leadership, of course, is going to play an absolutely fundamental role in that, because so much of this is going to be about culture, isn't it? And about organizational culture. And again, you guys know this very well from your professional, diverse lives, that culture is everything in an organization. Do people feel safe to innovate? Do they feel safe and supported by their leadership? Have they got a framework to operate within so they understand even what responsible application of these tools even is? And we're a long way from that, by the way, today, ladies and gents. We're a long, long way from that right now. There isn't not one of the single leading AI platforms, or in fact any AI platform that I have researched and studied, makes their algorithms fully transparently available for objective assessment in terms of the decision-making process, and in particular, their proprietary weighting mechanisms attached to the core of how the AI is working at the algorithm level. Not one of them does that, nobody. So to put it another way, we don't know how it's actually arriving at its decisions. So it's very hard to work out the unintended consequences, isn't it, when you don't actually know how something's working.
Yeah, and a couple of points on that, actually, because how does the rest of the world influence big tech when they're locked in terms of behind closed doors? They often, and many, Microsoft and Google will talk about their ethical use policies and all of these things of how it's been developed and everything else. Brilliant. Can you show us how you've done it your side before, how we use it? No. Okay, brilliant. Okay, so we've got to think about how this end, but actually what does that look like? And they're not going to give you the answer. But also back to that leadership thing of what it takes is leadership to employ the right people, allow radical candor and a space for psychological safety, but also get out the way and ensure that when a decision is made, that leadership at all levels rise up and allow them to influence. You talked about that, sunk cost fallacy. How many leaders are driving all of this stuff, saying they're creating the right culture, but ultimately, when people give an opinion, it's not listened to, and they continue to invest and sink the money into something that literally should have been ended a long time ago. So it's all of that bit, isn't it? Leadership isn't just making the decisions, it's allowing other people in your organization to have the space to help you facilitate those decisions rather than you making all the decisions. As leaders, I don't make all the decisions and I shouldn't make all the decisions. That's not to say I can't make a decision, but it's also the fact that across your business, there are people that are more experienced, more knowledgeable in a certain area than you are, but you have to let go of your ego to allow that decision to make. And that is one of the issues in leadership, isn't it?
100%. And I think also if you zoom up to the highest levels of leadership of the kind of organizations that are leading these platforms that we're all going to be using. And I saw a recent analysis done by one of the big analysis companies that was predicting the next steps with these AI companies. And it basically said there's going to be quite a big consolidation. So we've had a flood of AI companies suddenly appearing in the last 18 months or thereabouts. And their contention from their analysis was that it's going to consolidate down into some of the well-known big AI companies that we all know. Now, if that happens, I think there's a question for leadership for them as well about the role they're playing and how we can create a more sustainable and responsible, I think, future out of this. Because at the moment, remember, all of these companies are driven by a profit motive. Now, don't get me wrong, we live in a largely capitalist world, so I kind of get that, but nevertheless, I think with AI, it's bigger than that. It's too important to be left to just a profit motivation behind it, because I think it's got implications for all of humanity. And so I think in that context, one of the things I sort of touch upon a little bit in the book, and I would like to see, is some sort of democratic collective and a sort of collective group that maybe has some sort of oversight over this, because I think if we don't have that, then we could head into sort of stormy water when it comes to, we can't allow a purely profit-driven motivation, and the leaders involved in that, we can't allow that to be the main sole driver, would be my contention, because I think if we do, it's too big and too important to be left to just a purely profit motivation. And it's kind of where we are right now. So my contention about the future is, and all leaders have got a role to play in this. And so to speak to your point, Stephen, if I bring it to a more local level, I speak a lot at the end of the book about how, in an optimistic sense, we're all playing a part in this, and we should remember that AI isn't some separate thing that's already got a predetermined route. We are co-creating it as a reflection of us. I mean, you'll all be familiar, I'm sure, with things that have gone wrong with AI. So, back in 2016 and the early days of some of this, as we know AI today, there was a chatbot developed by one of the big tech companies, and it went very badly wrong. It very quickly became as offensive as it's possible to be. And people jumped on it and tried to blame the big tech company by saying, oh, this is dreadful, this thing that you have done. And I was thinking, it was reflecting us. It was reflecting the inputs from all the people interacting with it. So what it actually did was hold up a mirror to us as a human race and go, this is you. And even if it's ugly and unattractive, well, you might want to decide what you want to do about it, but that's you. And I think that's the hugging the cactus thing again. I think we've got to look at this and go, just remember, and this is the optimist in me, looks at it and goes, just remember, we're co-creating this. We are masters of our own destiny here. It is not the fault of an engineer somewhere if an algorithm reflects how we are behaving as a society back to us. And I don't want to, for a second, absolve any of the big tech companies from a huge role to play in their responsibility here, because they absolutely have. But I do think there's also a chance for us just to remember that this is what we make it. And we're at the dawn of an absolute new era here. And we're very lucky to be living in this time, in my opinion, because we are living in the most exciting of times right now. Because we're at the dawn of this AI revolution. And it will be what we choose to make it. And I just think that's exciting, but also a bit scary, because but the optimist in me thinks, let's get it right. We have enough people and enough smart people to get this right. And if we get it right, it will be the greatest force for good we've ever seen. And even if we get halfway towards that, won't it still be fantastic? I think what we have to avoid is just a whole group of powerful people going, let's just see what the art of the possible is with no rules, no restrictions, and no thought for the consequences. I don't think that will end well, but I'm optimistic. I think ultimately it's the responsible AI that will come out. And I think we need leaders who have a vision for that and how we're going to get there, and then enable, to take your point, Stephen, then enable everybody else who's working with them to actually take that forward.
Love it. And I love the idea of agency within constraints, agency within safe boundaries that we agree on. It's not dictated, it's a democratic space, but I really think that the responsible AI there is, yes, we have to have freedom, but freedom isn't free unless it's got some kind of safeguard in that space, and the balance of that is very difficult to get right, because the over controlling or the under controlling, it's a bit like parenting, isn't it? And with what we're all doing that at different stages. I know your children are older than mine, and my children are older than Steve's.
Yeah.
But we're wanting to give them agency and choice. But you don't say to your 4-year-old child, you can choose what you drink today. You can either drink water, milk, whiskey, Like you don't.
Yeah.
That's not what it goes. You go.
Yeah.
You give choices that are relevant for the space, and I think that's where we are, especially when you've got vulnerable people. You talked about vulnerable people. I really like that. That we've got a responsibility ethically as a society to protect those who are vulnerable, whether that's young people, whether that's people with additional needs, whether that's people who can easily be manipulated, whether it's underrepresented groups who have already been manipulated and controlled. We have a responsibility to do that, and that's what I like about the theme that you're bringing out of this book. Is it's that responsible is not controlling, but responsible is tied to that accountability and leadership.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if I was just on
Yeah.
that point, just an additional comment there. If all options are on the table, and I would love to see a future where a democratically owned and controlled AI platform became the dominant AI platform in the world. One that had an AI collective running it. And that collective would consist of academic experts, all manner of a diverse range of stakeholders, where the black box was open for independent, objective assessment of the algorithms to ensure that they were transparent and that controls were in place to control bias and a whole range of other things. I think if we had that, we could have the most powerful AI platform in the world. But the inconvenient truth in what I'm saying is there's always going to be someone's got to pay for it. No, but maybe it should be paid for through taxation or some means like that, so it becomes a national thing, paid for democratically by the users of it, and with all manner of rules and transparency about it, so that it becomes the closest we can get to responsible AI. I think if we had that, I think most people would choose to use it, because they'd understand how it's working. It would have fairness, equality, and things built in and transparently defined for us to change and tweak and evolve as it goes along. And I think that would be the ultimate future AI model. Now, some people started off that way. For example, I know Sam Altman originally had a view of a dream a bit like that, but of course it hasn't quite worked out that way, has it? So now they're like, well, we are going to make profit, but we're going to try and still be, doing the right thing, but we're going to be profit driven, So it's all kind of gone a little bit wrong. But I still have a sort of dream, if you like. I don't want to give I have a dream speech here, but I do have a vision of a future where I do think ultimately somebody or some groups of people, it might even be countries, come together. And I would guess it might even be the European Union that might be the place where this happens. I think a group of organisations and maybe even countries will come together to maybe create something a little bit like some of the themes I'm talking about. But I think that could happen, and it'd be a great thing to see.
I would agree, and that collective is a great move. We always finish our podcasts with 3 quickfire questions in these seasons, and so I've got one, Steve will do the other, and then I'll do the final one, if that's okay. So the first question is, what's one outdated educational practice we need to abandon?
Standardised assessment. Very predictable, I know, but it's valid.
We hear it often.
Yeah.
Often. How would you measure, or how should we measure, learning success beyond grades?
You see, well, my mind immediately goes there to things like happiness, health, and well-being. He says, his voice giving up. So I think I would look at they might be harder to measure things, but for me, I think we need to be creating people who are able to lead happy, healthy, productive lives that have meaning. And I know that needs careful definition of all those things I just said, and we haven't got time now to do it, but it would be that. I mean, if you look at the best teachers, they are so in touch, they can instinctively sense where their students are they okay? Or they can tell when they walk into the classroom, have they had a bad day before they even walk into that classroom? And they tailor their dynamics accordingly to make sure that person achieves what they need to achieve that day and things. It's all that sort of stuff, I think it's about putting people, human beings at the core. The biggest issue I have with how we run education, actually, in the UK anyway, is I have a huge issue with Ofsted, an absolutely massive academic issue with Ofsted, because I just simply find it truly incredible that nobody has yet shown me any academically rigorous evidence that shows causality between the inspection framework we deploy and human development. And surely education is supposed to be about human potential. And us becoming the best versions of ourselves that we could ever be. And if our main assessment tool that we assess compulsory education with, there is no independent, academically rigorous evidence that is compelling. I don't just mean one report, I mean compelling peer-assessed evidence that says, yeah, this inspection framework actually does help human development and humans to reach their full potential. I would totally buy into it, and I'd say, okay, fine, that is a compelling argument, and I get it. But we don't do that. And there's no evidence there to support that. And I just find that absolutely incredible that we have an entire education system that doesn't make sense.
Mike House from RM, just really quickly, I will mention this really quickly, said something to me recently that we treasure what we measure rather than measuring what we treasure. And I like that a lot. And I think he said that in a really clever way. Final one, Jim. Sorry, go on. No.
I was just going to say on that point, and I know I'm going into slightly sort of Disney-like philosophy here, but one of my heroes is John Lennon, and I just kind of think, he once said in an interview, the purpose of life is to be happy. It is, it really is. And whatever that happiness comes from, hopefully doing something positive in the world and making the world a bit better than how you found it. But ultimately, that's what it is about. So ultimately, for me, our system's got to be about helping people to lead happy, healthy, productive lives that have meaning and value, which isn't just boiled down to a metric like how much jobs they create or what their economic contribution is. That's not what life's about. So I would like to see that change.
Agreed. And final one is this, which is, what one thing would you want our listeners to remember?
That in all of the history of the universe and all of time, there's only one of you. So make it count and have a fabulous day and enjoy every moment and live in the present moment. I do believe we can learn a lot from dogs. Mine is asleep in the background at the moment. So maybe we should learn from that a little bit. But the wonderful thing about dogs is they just live in the present moment, don't they? Absolutely. And I think that's something about the natural world, On that point, and we'll end with this, but there's a wonderful book called Why Zebras Don't Get Ulcers. And in theory, a zebra should get an ulcer because it's black and white and stripy, and it's standing against an orange background usually, and there's a lion over there that's going to eat it for lunch in a few minutes. So zebras should be pretty stressed out. But the whole book is about how zebras live in the present moment. If they're thirsty, they drink. If they want something to eat, they eat. And if they're getting chased by a lion, well, they'll run as fast as they can. But they live in the present moment, so they don't get ulcers. And I think there's something interesting about that. I think, I would want people to take away that, without wishing to be too philosophical about it, the present moment's all we've got, so live in that and make the most of it.
Jimmy, it's always been an absolute pleasure chatting to you.
Likewise.
For those people that want to look and interest in Jimmy's book, The Responsible AI Revolution, links will be in the show notes, and go get it. It's a great read, and it puts a different spin on the push to evolution with AI and everything else. But Jimmy, absolute pleasure for you to join us, and hopefully everybody else will enjoy listening to it. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Jamie.
Appreciate it. Take care. Have a great rest of the day.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.